The spring sun hung high over Lake Tahoe, its golden light stretching across the crystal-clear water like a giant mirror. Garrett Lawson sat in his old wooden boat, the fishing line dropping into water so deep he could see the gravel at the bottom, more than 4 meters below. On the dock, Wyatt, his 9-year-old son, lay on his stomach, flipping through a book about airplanes. The rows of pine trees stood around the valley like the walls of an ancient cathedral. Birds sang, their calls echoing through the still air. In that moment, the world felt both small and safe. Then the sky was suddenly torn apart. A piercing shriek ripped through the air, metal screaming as if being twisted. Garrett jerked his head up. A private jet was plunging downward at a terrifying angle. Black smoke spewed from the right engine, spiraling into a long trail. "Dad!" Wyatt's panicked scream echoed from the dock. The aircraft slammed straight into the lake, less than 200 meters from them. A deafening explosion. Water shot upwards tens of meters high. Waves rolled toward Garrett's boat, rocking it violently. "Stay on the dock, Wyatt! Don't get in the water!" Garrett shouted, then threw himself into the lake. The cold water sliced into his skin. He swam fast, arms driving hard toward the rising cloud of black smoke. The smell of jet fuel was thick, burning his nose and throat. The closer he got, the clearer it became. The plane was sinking. Terrifyingly fast. Garrett took one deep breath and dove. Underwater, the world was hazy. Fuel leaking from the wreck formed a black mist. His eyes stung like they were being cut. His lungs began to burn. But he kept swimming. His hands swept blindly through the freezing dark. Then he saw it, the cockpit. The door was warped, the glass shattered. Inside, a figure struggled weakly. A woman, her arm trapped in the seatbelt. Garrett swam to her, grabbed the frame, and pulled hard. The metal groaned, but didn't move. He pulled again, this time with both hands, bracing his foot against the fuselage for leverage. The door gave way. His lungs were about to burst. His head spun. But he pushed inside, freed the woman from the seatbelt. Her hand was icy cold. No movement. Garrett wrapped his arm around her and kicked upward. When they broke the surface, sunlight exploded into his vision. He gasped for air, dragging the woman up and gently patting her back. She coughed. Once. Twice. Then breathed. Her eyes opened, frantic, locking with Garrett's. He didn't know she was Meredith Carlyle. He didn't know that saving her would change both their lives in ways no one could predict. And he certainly didn't know that. This woman carried the key to a painful past he thought he had buried forever. If you want to keep following emotional stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. But wait, who exactly is Meredith? And why did fate bring her crashing down right in front of the man who wanted nothing more than to hide from the world? The next morning, Garrett stood in the small kitchen, making coffee with the old pot that had once belonged to his father. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains Brooke, his late wife, had hung there 6 years ago, scattering soft streaks of light across the wooden table. The wooden cabin carried the faint scent of pine and old paper. In the corner, a small television on the shelf was broadcasting breaking news. Last night's miraculous plane crash survival. The screen showed aerial footage, rescue boats circling the crash site, divers plunging deep underwater, Coast Guard helicopters sweeping above. A headline ran across the bottom: "Billionaire CEO survives plane crash." Garrett turned off the TV before the announcer could say the woman's name. He didn't want to know. He didn't need to. In his experience, people labeled as heroes rarely got happy endings. They only dragged more trouble behind them. He poured the coffee and glanced out the window toward the lake. The water was calm again, still as glass, as if yesterday had never happened. No explosion, no airplane tearing through the sky and falling right before their eyes. But Garrett knew one thing well. Some scars never smooth out again. 6 years ago, he had been a senior aerospace engineer at Carlisle Aerospace, where they developed experimental aircraft systems so advanced they didn't even have official names yet. Garrett loved that work, loved the precision, the logic, the way metal, mathematics, and motion blended to challenge gravity. But he was also the one who had seen what no one wanted to admit: a critical flaw in the hydraulic control system. Something that could explode under high stress. Garrett wrote reports, sent emails, raised concerns in meetings. His direct supervisor simply smiled and told him not to worry. Upper management would handle it. But they didn't. 3 months later, during a test flight over the Nevada desert, that very system failed. The aircraft exploded in midair. The pilot survived thanks to the ejection seat. But Brooke, Garrett's wife, who had been in the observation tower with the other families, did not. He still remembered that call, the trembling voice of the site manager. "There's been an explosion. The observation tower collapsed. We're doing everything we can." Garrett drove 3 straight hours from headquarters to Nevada. The entire time he kept thinking, "She's fine. Brooke has to be fine. She's just waiting for me." But when he arrived, the observation tower was nothing but rubble. The west wall, where families stood to watch, had collapsed completely. The shock wave from the mid-air explosion had brought it down in seconds. Brooke had been standing right there. Her hand had been holding Wyatt's, their 3-year-old boy who had been pointing at the sky, eyes shining with excitement as he watched the plane take off. She had been bending down, whispering something into his ear. Then the explosion happened. Wyatt survived, because Brooke had pulled him into her arms, using her own body to shield him. The boy suffered only minor scratches, but Brooke didn't make it. Garrett had knelt beside his wife's body amid the debris. His hands trembled as he touched her face, still warm, as if she were only sleeping. But there was no breath, no heartbeat. Wyatt stood next to him, not crying, not speaking, just staring at his mother, his big round eyes filled with confusion. "Dad," he whispered, "what's wrong with Mom? Will she get up?" Garrett couldn't answer. He just held his son tight, held him as hard as he could, and let the tears fall for the first time. The next day, Garrett submitted his resignation. He didn't need a single second to think about it. There was no severance pay, no apology, only a cold confidentiality agreement and a polite suggestion that he should move on with his life. The company offered compensation for Brooke's death, calling it a tragic accident, a catastrophic, unforeseeable incident. They paid for the funeral. They sent flowers. But they never admitted fault. Garrett still remembered that final meeting clearly. The room was cold, washed in pale fluorescent light. Expensive suits sat upright on the other side of the long table. "Mr. Lawson," the HR director said in a flat tone as if reading from a script, "we understand your grief, but your continued sharing of personal views on the technical issue is negatively affecting company morale." "Personal views?" Garrett's voice came out almost strangled with anger. "I warned you 7 times. 7. I have the data. I have the inspection reports. My wife is dead because you ignored them." The man at the head of the table, Philip Carlisle, executive vice president, gave a small smile, a cold one, untouched by his eyes. "Mr. Lawson, we conducted a full investigation. The explosion resulted from multiple unforeseeable factors. There was no negligence on the company's part. No negligence, Garrett shot to his feet, slamming his hand on the table. I wrote a 47-page report. I ran failure simulations. Enough. Philip raised a hand, cutting him off. You have two options, Mr. Lawson. 1. Sign this agreement, accept compensation, and remain silent. 2. We will protect the company's reputation through any legal means necessary. And I assure you, you will never work in aerospace again. Garrett looked down at the stack of papers in front of him. Numbers with far too many zeros. A sum painted in blood. Then he thought of Wyatt. His 3-year-old boy staying with the babysitter, not understanding why Mommy wasn't coming home. He needed a father. He needed someone who survived, not someone bent on self-destruction. Garrett signed. His hand shook so hard the signature wavered like the ink of a stranger. A wise decision, Philip said, collecting the documents. And remember this, Mr. Lawson. This agreement is permanent. One careless comment, one social media post, one interview, and we will sue you into bankruptcy. That was the last time Garrett ever set foot in Carlisle Aerospace. He put Wyatt, not yet 3 years old, in the car and drove north until pavement became gravel. Then gravel became dirt. He bought this wooden cabin with what remained of their final savings. There was no internet here, and cell service was spotty unless he climbed halfway up the hill. There was only a wood-burning stove, a small wooden dock, and a view of the lake stretching for miles. Garrett repaired engines for people in the area, lawnmowers, chainsaws, occasionally someone's old pickup truck. He taught Wyatt how to fish, how to read the sky for wind, how to be kind even when the world wasn't kind back. At night, after Wyatt fell asleep, Garrett sat under the lantern light, turning the pages of old engineering textbooks. Not because he still longed for the work, but because he couldn't forget it. The equations, the stress calculations, the warnings he'd written that no one cared about. Hank Bowers, the owner of the general store in town, once asked him why a man so talented would choose to live alone in the mountains. Garrett only smiled and said he liked the quiet. The truth was too heavy to place on anyone's shoulders. The scar on his wrist, thin and pale, always reminded him of the system that betrayed him, of the warnings that were buried, of the price he paid simply for speaking the truth. Now, 6 years had passed, and the small wooden cabin once again echoed with the peaceful sounds of a life slowly rebuilding itself. Wyatt's laughter, the crackling of the stove, the rustling of book pages in the quiet night. Not the life Garrett had dreamed of, but the life he had. And that was enough. He did not know that the woman he had dragged from the cockpit yesterday was hunting the person responsible for nearly killing her. And he certainly did not know that her survival would set into motion a chain of events no one would be able to stop. The roar of engines rose from the dirt road around 10 in the morning. Garrett was standing out in the yard, splitting a few more logs on the chopping block. His flannel sleeves were rolled up, despite the lingering early spring chill in the air. Inside the house, Wyatt sat at the kitchen table, absorbed in his airplane model. Glue and balsa sticks were scattered across the surface like a miniature battlefield of the boy's making. The engine noise grew louder, a deep rumble completely out of place in the quiet of the mountains. Then 3 sleek black Cadillacs glided out from between the pines. Sunlight hit the car roofs, making them shine like mirrors. Dust rose in blurred ribbons behind them, drifting through beams of light slipping between the branches. Garrett set the axe down and wiped his hands on his jeans. His heartbeat quickened without his permission. The lead car stopped only a few meters from the porch. The door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was tall, somewhere in her 40s, her black hair tied into a neat ponytail, sharp-featured. She wore a navy blazer and matching trousers, probably worth more than Garrett's old pickup truck. A faint bruise still shadowed her temple, and a white bandage on her jaw stood out against her pale skin. But her eyes remained strong, steady. Meredith Carlyle approached, the heels of her shoes crunching rhythmically on the gravel. Two assistants stepped out of the cars behind her. Both wore black suits, holding leather folders and tablets. One carried a thick envelope, the kind you could recognize even from a distance. Meredith stopped in front of him and extended her hand. Her handshake was firm and decisive, the kind that sealed deals and ended debates. "You saved my life," she said, her voice clear and composed. "Then you disappeared before I had the chance to thank you. I wanted to do that in person." Garrett withdrew his hand slowly. His expression was hard to read. "No need. I only did what anyone would do." Meredith's lips twitched slightly. Not quite a smile. Not everyone would. Most people would pull out their phones to record and post it online before calling for help. One of the assistants stepped forward, lifting the envelope with both hands as though presenting something ceremonial. "We'd like to compensate you for your bravery," he said, "and we also request that you sign a confidentiality agreement, standard procedure for incidents involving the company." Garrett didn't take it. He glanced toward the shimmering lake beyond the pines, then looked straight into Meredith's eyes. His voice was low but firm. "I don't want money, and I don't sign things like that anymore." Meredith tilted her head, as though fitting a missing piece into place. There was something in Garrett's voice. Old, bitter, suppressed to the point of being almost invisible. "You don't want to know why my plane went down?" she asked. "Not my business," Garrett replied. "It could have been sabotage," Meredith continued, studying the small shifts in his face. "The FAA is investigating. Someone may have interfered with the hydraulic system." Garrett's jaw tightened, only for a moment, then went still again. Meredith glanced toward the open doorway. From where she stood, she could see the simple, sturdy furnishings. The neatly stacked firewood beside the stove, a photo on the wall, a woman holding a child, both smiling happily. And next to it, pinned to a corkboard, were technical diagrams, detailed schematics, clean, precise lines, correct symbols, exact measurements, neat handwriting. She stepped closer, narrowing her eyes at the nearest corner of the blueprint. The logo was unmistakable. Carlyle Aerospace. Meredith's breath caught. She turned back to Garrett. His face was calm as a still lake, but his shoulders carried all the tension underneath. They stood there in silence. No sound, no words. Then Wyatt peeked out from the doorway, curious, clutching his airplane model in his hands. "Dad, who are they?" Garrett's expression softened instantly. "Just passing visitors, son. Go back inside." Wyatt nodded and ran back in. Meredith watched the door close, then turned back to Garrett. Something had shifted in her gaze. Perhaps recognition. Perhaps empathy. She gave a small, slow nod, as if a piece had finally clicked into place. "Thank you again, Mr. Lawson," she said, addressing him by name for the first time. "If you ever need anything, you know how to find me." She didn't wait for his response. She turned and walked back to the car. All three Cadillacs reversed down the narrow road, their engines humming like the breath of some large creature. Then they vanished behind the pines, as quickly and quietly as they had arrived. Wyatt stepped onto the porch, watching the fading trail of dust. "Dad, why did she come all the way out here just to say thank you?" Garrett watched the dust settle. "She's from another world, Wyatt." "Not ours." But even as he said the words, he knew things were no longer simple. By late afternoon, the story had spread throughout the valley, then far beyond its quiet borders. But it wasn't the simple version of a man saving a life and disappearing. It was the distorted, sensationalized version, the one that sold more ads. Someone had leaked the video of the crash. A blurry clip recorded on the phone of a hiker on the mountainside. Someone who had happened to raise their phone at the exact moment the plane went down. The footage showed the impact, the column of water exploding upward like a plume of white fireworks, and a tiny figure swimming toward the wreckage. Within hours, the video went wildly viral. News outlets clawed at it. Bloggers analyzed every frame. And then the venomous headlines began to appear, each more poisonous than the last. Hero or mastermind? Suspicious proximity in CEO rescue. Billionaire crash. Was she lured to a remote lake? The reclusive mountain man. What is he hiding? They spun bizarre narratives. A man living alone in the woods, no employment records, no digital footprint. A woman crashing right onto his land. Too convenient in their eyes. The valley that had been Garrett's refuge for 6 years, in a single night, became a sprung trap. Reporters poured in by midday, renting rooms at the town motel, lining news vans along the main road, knocking on doors for quotes. Hank's general store quickly became the epicenter. Cameras set up outside. Journalists bought coffee just to ask every customer whether they knew who Garrett Lawson really was. Hank called Garrett around 2 in the afternoon. His voice was full of confusion and guilt. "Garrett, I'm sorry. They're saying awful things, and people are starting to believe them." Garrett thanked him, then hung up. There was nothing left to say. At the garage where he worked part-time, Ron Atwood, the only person who had ever given him a job when no one else would, pulled him aside near the end of the day. Ron's eyes were sincere, yet firm. "Garrett, I don't buy into any of those rumors, but customers are getting uneasy. I think it's best if you take some time off, until things settle down." Garrett didn't argue. He only packed his tools into the box, gently, the motions worn into him from thousands of repetitions. His hands were steady, but his jaw was tight. Then he walked out to his truck and left. That evening, when he stopped to buy bread and milk for Wyatt, Garrett felt the eyes following him. The whispers trailing behind him like shadows seeping through every aisle. A woman pushing a cart pulled her daughter closer the moment he walked past, as though he were a threat. Near the checkout, a man in a work jacket said loudly to his friend, "No one just happens to be there when a billionaire's plane crashes. He must have planned the whole thing." Garrett set his basket down on the counter and walked out empty-handed. That night, rain hammered steadily against the cabin roof. The sound was rhythmic, like a mournful drum. Wyatt sat at the kitchen table, poking at his dinner. His eyes were red. "Dad, why are people saying you're bad?" Garrett looked at his son in silence. Wyatt had lost his mother before he could remember her face. He had never asked for anything except a peaceful life. And now, even that was beginning to crumble. Garrett wanted to explain that the world preferred entertaining lies over boring truths, that people believed what they wanted to believe because it was easier than thinking. But he couldn't say all of that to a child. He simply reached across the table and took his son's hand. "Sometimes people are afraid of things they don't understand, son. This will pass." Wyatt looked down at his plate and whispered, "Will it really pass, Dad?" Garrett didn't answer. He couldn't promise something he himself didn't believe. He cleared the table, turned off the kitchen light. The room fell into darkness, leaving only the sound of rain, the soft breaths of his son, and the feeling of a world outside turning its back on him. But the thing that hurt him most wasn't the headlines. It wasn't the whispers. It was Wyatt's eyes. the eyes of a child looking at the father he loves, with confusion and fear, because he didn't understand why the man who taught him kindness, honesty, and doing the right thing was being treated like a criminal. That night, Garrett lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the old scar on his wrist burning again. History was repeating itself. Once again, he had done the right thing. And once again, he was being punished for it. Miles away, in her office at Carlisle Aerospace, Meredith sat motionless before the screen. The radar log of her flight was open in front of her, and there was a gap. A section cut out, clearly on purpose. Someone had wanted her dead. The Carlisle Aerospace Tower rose 40 floors into the San Francisco sky. Glass and steel reflected the gray heavens like a funeral shroud over the city. Meredith's office sat on the top floor, a minimalist, cold space where every line was clean and precise. Leather chairs, a desk of reclaimed wood, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked straight out over Puget Sound. The water was inky black, restless beneath the thick clouds. But tonight, that space was no longer an office. It felt like a cage. Meredith sat alone, the city lights reflected faintly on the glass. The soft hum of her computer was the only sound. She opened the personnel database. She paused for one long second before typing the name she had been forcing herself not to think about since morning. Garrett Lawson. The file loaded painfully slowly. Then the lines of information appeared, each one as cold as ink on ice. Employment terminated following incident review. Not eligible for rehire. Meredith clicked deeper. An HR report, a technical memo, a chain of emails. She read them line by line, and the more she read, the paler she became. Garrett had warned them, not once, not twice, 7 times. 7 separate messages about the same critical flaw in the hydraulic control system. He marked them high priority, sent them to his supervisor, then higher, then all the way to the executive vice president. And each time, he received the same response. "We will review this. The issue is under evaluation." But they had not reviewed, not evaluated. 3 months later, the Nevada test flight, the explosion. 1 fatality recorded in the report. Civilian observer. Name redacted for privacy. Meredith opened the attached incident file, and the name appeared like a blade. Brooke Lawson. Wife of Garrett Lawson. Leaving behind a husband and a child. Meredith's hands trembled violently. She leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the screen as if it had detonated. The man who had saved her life was the man who had lost everything because of her company, because of her family. A knock on the door made her jolt. Meredith closed the file in an instant. Her uncle, Philip Carlisle, walked in as he always did, without knocking again, without waiting for her invitation. 62 years old, silver-haired, dressed in a navy-tailored suit that fit a man who had dominated boardrooms for 3 decades. He smiled, a smile that never touched his eyes. "Working late again, Meredith?" She forced her voice into something neutral. "Just tracking the investigation progress on the crash. It's time-consuming." Philip stepped to the window, hands in his pockets, looking down at the city. "I heard you went to the valley yourself to meet the man who pulled you out of the wreckage." "I wanted to thank him in person," Meredith said carefully. "I felt it was the right thing to do." "Of course," Philip said lightly, still not turning back. "But you should be cautious. People are already spinning stories. The more chaos, the better for those who profit from it." Meredith swallowed her discomfort, keeping her voice perfectly even. "He did nothing wrong. He saved my life." Philip turned, his eyes sharp as ice. I believe that. But perception is what matters, Meredith. You know that better than anyone. He walked toward the door, one hand on the handle. Then he paused, as if remembering something. Oh, and I hope you're not digging through old personnel files. We have more important problems to focus on. The words drifted lightly, but thin as a blade. Meredith's heart pounded, but her face didn't show a single millimeter of change. Why would I do that? She asked, sounding so calm even she was surprised. Philip smiled again. No reason at all. I just don't want you distracted by ghosts. Then he left. Meredith waited until his footsteps disappeared completely. Then she reopened the files, printed everything, stacked it neatly, and tucked the documents into her bag. She left the building in a thin drizzle, her mind spinning. The man who saved her had been destroyed by her company, by her family. And now she stood before a choice: bury the truth or expose it and shatter the Carlyle empire from within. But as she settled into the driver's seat, watching raindrops hit the windshield like tiny needles, another thought slipped in. If Philip knew she was investigating, if he knew what she had found, she would be the next target. Meredith started the engine. Headlights cut through the silvery gray rain. She drove home, but this time she checked the rearview mirror every few minutes. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe she was overreacting. But someone who had just survived a plane crash knew better than anyone that sometimes paranoia is the only reason you stay alive. The call came at 9:43 p.m. Garrett's old flip phone, the one he kept charged not out of necessity, but habit, buzzed on the kitchen table. He almost didn't pick up. But something made him answer. "Mr. Lawson?" A low, calm, professional voice on the other end. "This is Meredith Carlyle." Garrett's hand tightened. "How did you get my number?" "I have resources," Meredith replied. "I need to meet you tonight. There's something important in your file that I found." "I don't think that's a good idea. The press is—" "I know they're watching you," Meredith said, "and I suspect someone wants you silent. I'm already on my way. You don't need to—" A thud came from Wyatt's room. "Hold on," Garrett said, and dropped the phone. Wyatt was sitting upright on the bed, clutching his chest, his face pale and drenched in sweat. His mouth hung open, trying to drag air into his lungs, but every breath was shallow, thin, desperate. Garrett grabbed the inhaler from the bedside table, shook it, held it to his son's lips. Nothing. Empty. He tore open the bathroom cabinet. The spare inhaler wasn't there. Wyatt was gasping so hard his lips were turning blue. His fingers were cold as ice. Panic crushed Garrett's throat. He scooped Wyatt into his arms and ran for the door. But before he could reach it, headlights flooded the yard in a harsh white glare. A black Cadillac screeched to a stop at the porch. Meredith stepped out as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. "Get in. Now." Garrett had no other choice. He dove into the back seat, clutching Wyatt tightly against his chest. Meredith slid into the driver's seat and hit the gas. The car tore down the dirt road, headlights slicing through the darkness. Wyatt's breathing grew weaker. Garrett held his son close, his voice cracking. "Stay with me, Wyatt! Stay with me!" The drive that usually took 40 minutes, Meredith crushed into 25. The ER doors burst open. Nurses rushed out with a gurney. Garrett laid Wyatt down, his hands trembling so violently he barely recognized them as his own. A doctor in green scrubs took over immediately, connecting the boy to a nebulizer. Within seconds, Wyatt's chest began rising and falling more steadily. Garrett collapsed into a plastic chair in the hallway. He buried his face in his hands, breath ragged. Meredith stood a few steps away, coat soaked with rain, hair plastered against her cheek. She didn't speak. She just stood there. An hour passed. Finally, a doctor came out. Dr. Jonathan Reeves, the name on his badge, wore an exhausted but relieved expression. He's stable. We'll keep him overnight, but he's going to make a full recovery. Garrett exhaled, a sound torn somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He went into the room immediately, sitting beside his son's bed. Wyatt lay on his side, eyes half closed beneath the soft haze of the oxygen mask. "Dad," the boy whispered, voice frail. "I'm here. I'm right here with you." Wyatt closed his eyes again. His voice was little more than a breeze. "The pretty lady. Is she an angel?" Garrett let out a soft laugh, tears slipping down his face. "Maybe, son. Maybe she is." Meredith appeared in the doorway. Garrett looked at her, eyes red, wet, full of gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice still trembling. "If it weren't for you, I would have lost him." Meredith stepped inside, her voice softer than ever. "You don't have to face this alone. Not anymore." Garrett reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small USB drive, and placed it in her hand. "Everything I saved. The warnings, the emails, the evidence. Everything from 6 years ago. It's all in here." Meredith stared at the USB, her fingers closing around the cold metal. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because you're the only one who can do something about it." Meredith inhaled deeply, slowly. "Then I will. I promise." But as she tightened her grip on the USB, another thought slid into her mind, cold as the night wind slipping through the hospital window. Why did Wyatt have an asthma attack at this exact moment? Why was the inhaler empty tonight, of all nights? And why did Meredith feel as though something had been arranged? She looked at Garrett, the man who had once again run right up to the edge of life and death. A chilling thought rose up. Was someone trying to hurt him? Was someone trying to silence him? And were they starting by targeting the thing he loved most? Meredith glanced down at the USB in her hand. If that was true, then whoever did this was still out there. And they were certainly nowhere near finished. The small, discreet, unmarked conference room sat tucked inside a law office on the edge of downtown San Francisco. Meredith sat at one end of the long table, Garrett at the other. Between them, Dr. Fiona McAllister, an independent forensic engineer, plugged the USB into her laptop. The ceiling projector hummed before the screen lit up. The files appeared one by one. Emails with blazing red subject lines. Urgent hydraulic system evaluation required. Safety concerns. No response. Scanned pages of handwritten notes. Technical schematics covered in red ink annotations. Photos of cracked metal components. Test data showing failure rates far above acceptable thresholds. Dr. McAllister read each document carefully, saying nothing, but her expression darkened with every piece of evidence. She opened one email Garrett had sent to a supervisor. Hydraulic control system exhibits catastrophic failure potential under continuous load. Recommend immediate grounding of all units until redesign. 3 days later, the response contained only one line. Concern noted. Continue production. Dr. McAllister clicked into another file, a technical memo from the chief engineer to the executive board. Minor technical issue flagged by junior engineer. Recall costs estimated at $2.3 billion. Recommend internal review. She leaned back in her chair. After several seconds of silence, she said, "This is undeniable incriminating evidence. The person who approved these systems knew they were unstable, knew human lives were at risk." Meredith's voice dropped. Who signed off on it? Dr. McAllister opened the scanned approval form. At the bottom of the page was a familiar signature in blue ink. Philip Carlyle. The room fell into silence. Garrett leaned back in his chair. His face was unreadable, as though every emotion had been locked behind those steady eyes. Meredith stared at the screen. Her hand rested on the table, fingers rigid. Dr. McAllister spoke again. He approved it to avoid a recall. A recall would have cost the company billions, so he buried the reports and continued production. She turned to Garrett. He blamed the pilot, and when that wasn't enough, he made sure the man who warned them could warn no one else. Garrett's voice was flat, no longer anger, just truth. They fired me the day after the explosion, threatened to ruin me if I ever spoke a word. Said I'd never work in aerospace again. Meredith rose abruptly and walked to the window. Rain left long streaks across the cold glass. If I make this public, she said slowly, the company will collapse. Thousands will lose their jobs. My family's reputation will be destroyed forever. Garrett looked at her, calm, resolute. And if you don't, he said, more people will die. She turned around. Their eyes met, one carrying years of loss, the other weighted with the debt of conscience. A second later, Meredith nodded. Then I know what I have to do. Dr. McAllister shut the laptop and closed it. I'll prepare the full technical report. It will hold up in court, before the FAA, before any agency. Meredith thanked her, then left the office with Garrett. They walked into the parking lot as rain pattered steadily on the roof above. Garrett spoke first. You don't have to do this. You could bury it. Protect yourself. Meredith looked at him through the curtain of rain. I could, she said. But if I did, I'd be no different from him. She paused. The truth always resurfaces, like that plane in the lake. It may sink, but it doesn't disappear. Garrett almost laughed, a weary, sincere sound. No, it doesn't. Meredith stepped into her car. Before starting the engine, she lowered the window. I'll need you to testify when all of this comes to light. I will, Garrett said. Meredith nodded, then drove off into the rain. Garrett remained in the parking lot, watching the taillights fade into the watery darkness. For the first time in 6 years, he felt the tightness in his chest loosen. A weight had been lifted, not entirely, but enough for him to breathe. The truth was finally going to be spoken, and this time, someone was finally listening. The emergency board meeting was convened at 8 a.m. on Thursday. When Meredith walked in, the 40th floor conference room was already packed. Tailored suit executives sat around the gleaming long table. Tablets glowed. Coffee steamed in ceramic cups. Lawyers lined the wall. Documents clutched to their chests. Philip Carlyle sat at the head of the table. His expression was composed, fingers interlaced. Morning sunlight streamed through the wall of windows behind him, casting a cold sheen across his shoulders. Meredith entered last, carrying a slim leather folder and a tablet. She did not take a seat. The entire room turned toward her at once. Philip smiled, soft as a caress, sharp as thorns. Meredith, good. Let's keep this brief. We need to address the media response and shape our messaging. I agree, Meredith said. She stepped straight to the front of the room, connected her tablet to the wall screen. The screen flickered, then displayed an email. Date, time, 6 years and 4 months ago. A headline in bold, hydraulic failure risk, immediate action required. Sender, Garrett Lawson. The room seemed to vibrate. Whispers slashed through the air. Philip's smile faded, then vanished entirely. Meredith switched to the next slide. A photo of a hydraulic component split wide open. Then another email. This time from Philip himself. Bury this. We're not recalling 50 aircraft over a minor flaw. Production continues. She left the words exactly as they were. No commentary, no embellishment. A board member shot to his feet, face draining of color. If these documents are authentic, they are entirely authentic, Meredith said, her voice precise. She clicked again. A scanned approval form. Philip's familiar blue ink signature sat on the last line. The Nevada test flight incident report appeared. 1 civilian fatality, Brooke Lawson. Another board member rose, his face stark white. He closed his folder and hurried out. Then a second. Then a third. In less than 2 minutes, half the room was empty. Philip slammed his hand on the table, the impact cracking through the room like thunder. What do you think you're doing, Meredith? Are you trying to destroy this company? Destroy everything your father spent his life building? Meredith turned to face him, her gaze unshaken. No, Uncle Philip. You destroyed it the day you chose money over human lives. She set the leather folder in front of him. I resign as CEO, effective immediately. I've contacted the FAA. They will be launching a full investigation. You'll be hearing from them soon. Philip's face flushed red, his voice almost forced between his teeth. You think you're a hero? You think this makes you better than me? Meredith spoke softly, each word a blade. I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm just choosing what's right. She turned and walked out. Behind her, the room erupted into chaos. Chairs scraping, voices shouting, phones ringing. But Meredith didn't look back. She pushed through the glass doors leading to the plaza outside. Outside, reporters had gathered in a dense crowd. Cameras flashed wildly as she stepped out. One reporter lunged forward first. Ms. Carlyle, is it true you're accusing your own uncle of sabotage and concealing safety information? Meredith stopped on the first step. I'm not accusing anyone, she said clearly. The evidence speaks for itself, and I will fully cooperate with all investigations related to safety at Carlyle Aerospace, past and present. Another reporter pushed in. What about Philip Carlyle? Do you believe he should be held responsible? That's for the authorities to decide, Meredith replied. I've given them everything they need. She descended the steps and walked toward her car. Inside, her hands were still shaking, but she still managed to start the engine steadily and drive away. At the small cabin by the lake, Garrett sat on the porch, his laptop resting on his lap. The headline crawling across the news ticker read, CEO exposes family cover-up in deadly aircraft scandal. He closed the laptop. A breeze drifted up from the lake, the sky slowly clearing. For the first time in years, he felt his lungs open fully enough to breathe. The front door swung open. Wyatt ran out onto the porch, holding the airplane model he had just finished assembling. Dad! I finished it! Look! Garrett lifted his son into his arms. It's perfect, Wyatt. The boy looked up, eyes shining with hope. Dad, do you think I can be an engineer like you someday? For a moment, Garrett's throat tightened. He thought of Brooke, thought of the years swallowed by silence, thought of everything lost, and this moment, this possible new future built on truth. He lowered his forehead to his son's. You can be anything you want to be, he said, and I'll be here, every step of the way. 2 days later, Meredith drove back into the valley. No escort, no glossy Cadillacs. Just a rental sedan and a grocery bag on the passenger seat. She parked beside Garrett's old pickup and knocked on the door. Wyatt opened it first, his eyes lighting up. You came back. Meredith crouched down, smiling. I promised, didn't I? Garrett appeared behind his son, surprise flickering across his face. "I didn't think you'd actually come." "I'm not here as a CEO," Meredith said. "I'm here as someone who owes you more than I can repay. I brought dinner, if that's all right." Garrett stepped aside. "Come in." Dinner unfolded in the small, cozy kitchen. Pasta with marinara sauce, garlic bread, and a big bowl of salad. Wyatt excitedly talked about his model airplanes, showing off every part. Meredith listened intently, asking questions with genuine interest, as if this was the most important part of her day. When Wyatt had gone to bed, Garrett and Meredith sat on the porch, each with a cup of coffee. The sky was crowded with stars, so quiet that even the soft wind could be heard. Garrett spoke first. "I lost faith in people a long time ago. After Brooke died, after they fired me. I believed that doing the right thing only gets you crushed." Meredith looked over at him. "And now?" "Now," he replied slowly, "I think maybe it still matters, because of what you did. You risked everything, your career, your reputation, your family. Not many people would." Meredith shook her head gently. "I only did what you did before me. If anyone deserves the word brave, it's you. I just listened." She paused, her eyes drifting into the night. "I can't stop thinking about Brooke, a woman I never met, yet her death, I share a piece of that responsibility. I can't undo it, but I can make sure it never happens again, to anyone." Garrett's voice softened. "You already have." Meredith stood to leave. At the door, she turned. "There's an open position, head of safety and compliance. Not glamorous, but critical. And I don't think anyone is more qualified than you." Garrett stiffened. "I'm not sure I'm ready to step into that world again." "You don't have to decide today," Meredith said. "Just think about it." She stepped onto the porch and was about to leave when Garrett called out, "Meredith." She turned back. "You gave my wife justice," Garrett said, his voice catching. "Thank you." Meredith's eyes shimmered, though she didn't let a single tear fall. She only nodded, then drove off into the night. Garrett stood on the porch for a long time, watching her headlights fade into the dark. For the first time in 6 years, his chest felt lighter. The next morning, a familiar engine sound echoed through the valley. 3 Cadillacs returned, but this time they didn't bring power. They brought something else. Hope. Meredith stepped out, wearing jeans and a simple sweater. No proud CEO, just a person trying to do the right thing. Wyatt ran over, beaming. "Did you bring books for me?" "I did," Meredith laughed, "and something else." She handed Garrett a folder. Inside was a contract. Position, consultant, safety advisor, flexible hours, good pay. And on the last page, printed alone. All safety recommendations from this position must be implemented without executive override. Full authority over safety decisions. Garrett looked up, stunned. "You're serious?" "Completely," Meredith said. "The company needs someone unafraid of the truth. Someone who has already proven they'll fight for what's right. That's you." Wyatt tugged on his dad's sleeve, eyes wide. "Dad, you should do it. You're good at fixing things. And maybe it's time we stop hiding." Garrett's throat tightened. He looked at Meredith. "I'm not good at politics or boardrooms." "Good," Meredith smiled. "I don't need a politician. I need an engineer. Someone who sees what others don't." Garrett took a long breath. "All right, I'll do it." Meredith's smile was soft but bright. The 3 of them walked toward the lake. The water lay still, mirroring the sky. Meredith stood at the edge. "This is where everything began," she said. "Where you pulled me out." Garrett stood beside her, his gaze distant. "And where you pulled me out. of the dark. Wyatt picked up a pebble and tossed it into the water. Ripples spread outward in widening rings. "Do people really change?" he asked. Meredith looked at Garrett, then back at Wyatt. "I think they can try. And sometimes, that's enough." A gentle breeze brushed across the water. Sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the ripples. Meredith turned to Garrett, her voice soft but steady. "You pulled me out of the lake. Now I'm pulling you out of the dark." Garrett let out a quiet laugh. "I guess we're even now." "Not yet," she said with a small smile. "But this is a beginning." A year later, the inauguration of the Carlisle Safety Foundation was held inside the newly completed headquarters. The building was smaller than the old tower, compact, humble, built from recycled wood, with floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded every corner with light. Inside, a crowd had gathered: engineers, aviation safety advocates, families of past crash victims, whistleblowers once silenced, aerospace students, and reporters with cameras ready. Meredith stood at the podium, her hair falling naturally over her shoulders, a sharply tailored blazer framing her posture. She looked out at the crowd, steady, though her eyes carried a trace of emotion. "1 year ago," she began, her voice low but resonant, "I nearly lost my life, not because of bad luck or the will of the universe, but because people in power chose profit over safety. Silence over the truth." She paused, letting the words settle. "But one man chose differently. 6 years ago, Garrett Lawson warned my company about a deadly flaw in the hydraulic system. He did everything right, and because of that, he lost his job, his reputation, and his wife, who died in the very crash he tried to prevent." Meredith's gaze shifted toward the front row, where Garrett sat beside Wyatt in a neatly pressed shirt. He gave her the slightest nod. "This foundation exists because of people like him," she continued. "People who refuse to stay silent. People who still believe doing the right thing matters, even when it costs them everything." The room rose to its feet. Applause thundered through the hall. Behind her, the screen displayed headline after headline. Philip Carlisle charged with 12 counts of corporate negligence. Carlisle Aerospace forms independent ethics committee. Families of victims praise unprecedented transparency. Meredith stepped off the stage. Garrett met her at the stairs. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it," she corrected, firm but gentle. The reception lasted another 2 hours. Garrett spoke with engineers who had once been silenced just like him. They shook his hand, thanked him, told him he had given them the courage to speak up. By late afternoon, the three of them drove back toward Lake Tahoe. Garrett pushed his old wooden boat onto the water. Wyatt brought along the model airplane he'd spent months assembling. Sleek, silver, its seams so perfect they were like dreams carved into plastic. He set it gently on the surface. At first, it wobbled. Then the breeze nudged it forward, gliding smooth as breath. Meredith stood at the shore, hands tucked in her coat pockets, watching quietly. "You know," she said, without taking her eyes off the lake, "I used to think power was control, holding the reins." "And now?" Garrett asked. "Now I think power is knowing when to let go, when to trust someone else to do the right thing." Wyatt ran over, shoes soaked, face flushed with happiness. Garrett pulled him close. The three of them stood there, watching the lake as the sun began to set. Gold, then amber, then a warm honey hue melting into the horizon. Meredith spoke softly, almost only for the two of them to hear. "Sometimes, the most precious thing isn't being saved, it's being forgiven." Garrett looked at her. You don't need forgiveness. You needed courage, and you found it. A faint smile touched Meredith's lips. The pain of the past didn't vanish. The losses weren't erased. But for the first time, the future felt within reach. In his new office at Carlisle Aerospace, Garrett sat at his desk, staring out through a wide window. Technical books lined the shelves, a photo of Wyatt holding his model plane. Another of Brooke, smiling in warm sunlight. On his desk lay an open file, a proposal for improved safety protocols. Small changes, but ones that would save lives. And this time, no one ignored them. No one overrode him. No one silenced him anymore. The phone buzzed. A text from Wyatt. "Dad, I got an A in science. My teacher says I can be an engineer like you." Garrett smiled and typed back, "I'm proud of you. I'll be home soon." He leaned back in his chair, looking out over the San Francisco Bay shimmering in the afternoon light. 6 years ago, he thought his life was over, that doing the right thing only cost him everything. He had been wrong. Truth always matters, and sometimes, just sometimes, it wins. The lake shimmered under the twilight. The sky was so clear it felt touchable. Across the water, the light stretched into a ribbon of hope. Steady, unbreakable. Garrett Lawson had saved a life and found redemption for his own. Meredith Carlisle had lost an empire, but reclaimed her soul. And Wyatt, who lost his mother far too young, now had a future built on truth, protected by integrity. A world where those who speak up aren't punished, where courage is recognized, and where sometimes even heroes get a beautiful ending. If you stayed with this story until the very last second, thank you. Stories like this remind us that courage often comes from the most ordinary people, and justice, even when late, is still worth fighting for. If you want more deep, emotional, real-world stories like this, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and join me for the next journey. See you in the next story.